We move to topical questions. The first question, Ian Gray.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it supports the proposals that the Scottish Court Service is consulting on regarding court closures.
Cabinet Secretary Kenny McCaskill.
The consultation is being led by the Scottish Court Service and sets out their proposals for the future structure of our courts. Any final proposal to close courts will need to come before Parliament, most likely in spring 2013, and I am therefore not prejudging the outcome of the current consultation process for any specific proposal. I am clear, however, that reform of our courts is necessary. We cannot deliver better access to justice by avoiding the need for change. The towns that we live in, the places we work, the way we do business and the availability of transport has all changed considerably since Victorian times, when many of our court buildings were established. Crime levels are at their lowest level for 37 years, and the number of civil proceedings has fallen sharply. Major reforms of the justice system are in train, and our court structures must adapt to reflect these developments.
Ian Gray.
Well, the Cabinet Secretary has been hiding behind this process for almost a year now. At every stage, he's told us that there are no proposals to shut courts, but there always have been. He told me that there would be consultation meetings I could attend, but there were not. He told me the Lord President would engage with me on the issue and the arguments for my local court in Haddington, but the Lord President said he could not. So what reassurance can the Cabinet Secretary give me that this latest consultation stage is anything more than a sham?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I have to say I don't think that the landscape that was created by the Judiciary Act is understood or recognised by Ian Gray. This Parliament decided that the separation of powers was appropriate and important, that there should be a differentiation and a separation between executive, legislative and indeed the judiciary. It also recognised it was important that the judiciary not only should be independent from political interference, but are the people best placed to be able to deal with the court service. I am sorry that Mr Gray is so disparaging about our most senior judge. What I can say is I do believe that if he engages with the Scottish Court Service, and it is their consultation, then I am not going to prejudge matters, but I think I have more faith not only in the Lord President and in the Scottish Court Service than he does, and I also understand the need in a democracy for the separation of powers between the legislative and indeed the judiciary aspects to preserve the democracy that we all hold so dear.
Mr Gray.
Well, frankly, if the Cabinet Secretary thinks that these proposals are a response to changes in the way in which we live, it's he who does not understand how the court system for which he is responsible operates in modern Scotland. These proposals will undermine the viability of towns like Haddington in my own constituency. They will condemn victims and witnesses to lengthy and expensive journeys. They will take local police off our streets for longer, and they will create barriers to civil redress for our citizens. The truth is, this is a cost-saving exercise which has nothing to do with providing the kind of access to justice that people in modern Scotland need, require and deserve. I am asking, will the Justice Secretary listen to my constituents, the users of my court, and will he put them first rather than his bottom line?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think many of the worries that Mr Gray has are quite legitimate, that we should be trying to ensure that courts are as proximate as they can be, that we take into account travel and costs for those who will work there and those who have to give evidence there or those who have to appear there. That's why I would suggest that Mr Gray would be well advised to read the document, and in particular the chapters relating to Haddington, where, as I recall, there are a clear statement of what it does in terms of cost, time and availability to go from Musselburgh, Tranent and Prestonpans to Haddington, and how in fact the cost, time and transportation is easier, quicker and cheaper for people in those areas than it is to get to Haddington. So I think Mr Gray would do well to read the consultation document, to consider whether the needs and wants of his constituents in those parts may be better by going to Edinburgh and thereafter perhaps to do the Lord President the dignity of his office and to engage perhaps more meaningfully with him.
Dave Thompson.
The consultation is proposing the closure of Dingwall Sheriff Court with business moving to Inverness, but neither Dingwall nor Inverness is really fit for purpose in the 21st century to deal with these cases. I will be proposing in my response to the consultation that a brand new court be built in the Inner Murrayfirth area in Dingwall to replace both Dingwall and Inverness. But of course, for that to happen, capital funding would need to be provided. And I would ask the Cabinet Secretary if he would look seriously at that as an option.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think these are again matters that should be put to the Scottish Court Service. I think the Scottish Court Service accept the point made by Mr Thompson that there are limitations on the current facilities in both Inverness and Dingwall. And while I'm sure the Scottish Court Service would welcome the opportunity to have new purpose-built court facilities to replace some of their older and less flexible sites, the financial situation means that funding new facilities will be extremely challenging in the short to medium term. If, however, local stakeholders believe that there is a business model that could fund a new court using proceeds from finding new uses for the existing buildings, I would encourage them to engage with SCS about that. Clearly, these current buildings cause great difficulties, but it is a matter that I would urge Mr Thompson to discuss with the Court Service, where I think you might find a willingness to see if we can work towards shared solutions.
PMD.
If a court closes, as is proposed in the case of Arbroath in my constituency, and the business it conducts is transferred to a neighbouring court, in this case Forfar, will some or all of the jobs at the court which is to be closed transfer over with that business?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think there's a clear expectation that the jobs will follow the work, and it's not that there's going to be less work, it's just going to be conducted in a manner that's more productive, that also takes place in buildings that are more suited for purpose, and therefore I can give staff an assurance that the Scottish Court Service proposals are that staff who currently work in a court designated to close will simply move to where the work is due to take place, where that building was in fact, as I say, where they previously were employed.
Claire Baker.
In light of the Scottish Court Service consultation stating it cannot close courts of its own hands and it is the decision of Scottish ministers, will the Scottish Government reconsider the proposal to remove jury trials from Kirkcaldy, as the consultation itself recognises that Kirkcaldy would be the most appropriate location for a sheriff and jury centre serving East Fife?
Well, it's not the decision of Scottish ministers, Claire Baker will know, it's the decision of the Scottish Parliament. It is, though, my responsibility to bring these matters to the court once the Scottish Court Service and the Lord President have carried out matters. The review deals not only with the proposed closure of some courts, both sheriffs and JPs, it deals with aspects relating to where the High Court circuit sits and indeed to where jury trials are carried out. I think these matters are best dealt with by people contributing to the consultation, which is not as yet finished, to make sure that they discuss with the Lord President and the Scottish Court Service and see what actions can be taken from there, and thereafter, as I say, a formal consideration can be made, ultimately, by this chamber.
Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I remind the Cabinet Secretary that Peebles Sheriff Court, which is on the current hit list, was in fact targeted for closure several years ago by the Liberal administration and got a reprieve by relocating to Rosetta Road, co-locating with the police headquarters. Now, I'd like that to be taken into consideration. Further, out of 12 cases tomorrow in Peebles Sheriff Court, the one day when it sits in civil business, 5 are in the small claims courts. These are party litigants. So in considering the moving of sheriff courts, I think one should look at the interests of party litigants in these matters.
Cabinet Secretary.
Absolutely. I think that is why, as I mentioned in response to Ian Gray, the Scottish Court Service have looked at where people who are appearing in those courts, where people are giving evidence or indeed appearing as jurors, are in fact coming from. Party litigants are a particular aspect that have to be dealt with, equally as are those who are cited, whether to give evidence or to sit on a jury. So these aspects have to be taken in the round. But equally, it is quite clear that transport changes, that the nature of what communities are changes, that whether it's the opening up of the A1 in East Lothian or indeed perhaps the construction of roads or an improvement of roads or the Borders Rail, that change matters there. But this is a consultation document, and as I say, I think we should do the Lord President the honour of perhaps allowing the consultation to take place before we judge matters, but I am certain that the points made by Christine Graham will be taken on board, because it is appropriate that we should make sure that people should be able to access justice as easily as is possible.
Lewis MacDonald.
The Cabinet Secretary recognised the wider impact on county towns like Stonehaven in Kincardineshire, or indeed Haddington in Ian Gray's constituency, of proposals that local people should no longer look to those towns for local access to justice? Does he acknowledge that a town court can be just as important to a community's sense of its own identity as a village school? And if so, that is a matter for government as well as for the court service?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm glad Mr MacDonald raised that. I'm extremely knowledgeable of these matters. I went to school and grew up in Linlithgow, as did the First Minister. When I first practised law, I appeared in Linlithgow Sheriff Court. As it was, previous administrations closed Linlithgow Sheriff Court and removed it to Livingston. They did so on the basis that the vast majority of people who were using the court, who required to appear in the court, were more likely to be located in the south of the county than they were in the north of the county. I do not remember a great deal of outrage from the Labour benches regarding the removal of Linlithgow Sheriff Court to Livingston, but equally I think both myself and the First Minister will be able to reassure Mr MacDonald that though it did have an impact in terms of some job relocation, the apocalypse has not struck Linlithgow. It is a town I know well that is thriving, albeit the court is now located where the people are, as opposed to historically when it was Linlithgow Shire.
Nigel Dawn.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm concerned about the interaction with the police in all this, because the police, of course, are a can-do organisation who will therefore say, if you consult with them, that they will do anything that needs to be done. Whereas I'm concerned that they are consulted, and I'm just asking, I guess, the Cabinet Secretary to reassure me that they will be specifically consulted in a way where they don't respond on the can-do basis, but actually give serious advice on the implications of courts moving from A to B or B to C, in such a way that we actually have the officers on the streets rather than somewhere else waiting to be called in a court.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I can give the Nigel Dawn, the member, the assurance that the police are consulted in these matters, and indeed informally and anecdotally my experience with the police is that they take the view that the less transportation they have to various places, the better. Equally, some courts are no longer fit for purpose in terms of safety or security for what they do, and indeed we've also seen changes in terms of the situation in which people are retained in custody. So these are matters where we do have to have a synergy about where people are perhaps detained and the courts in which they are to appear. But it would already be the case that the police are perhaps already ahead of the game in reducing the number of places where people are held, and it has to tie in with the pace in which they will be taken to an appearance from custody.
Question number 2, Roderick Campbell.
To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on NHS 5's recent announcement regarding restrictions on the availability of IVF in the light of the imminent publication of a National Fertility Review.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the National Infertility Group's report with recommendations on eligibility criteria is expected to be with ministers by the end of December 2012. My preference would have been for all health boards to consider the implications of this report before making any announcements.
Lord Campbell.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, and I welcome the Scottish Government's commitment to £12 million of investment in IVF treatment, and I note that he would have preferred NHS 5 to have delayed their decision. As I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary is aware, there are important issues in relation to smoking, obesity and the number of treatment cycles. Can you confirm that the National Infertility Group will deal with that in their review?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I can confirm that the National Infertility Group will make recommendations in the report on smoking, obesity and rules on the number of IVF treatment cycles, and I look forward to receiving the group's report at the end of December.
Under Fraser.
Thank you. Can the Minister tell us if there are any other NHS boards which have restricted access to IVF treatment for smokers, or is this just a cunning ploy by NHS 5 to reduce its already very long waiting lists?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, first of all, I think it should be recognised that NHS Fife have invested an additional £100,000 in reducing their waiting list. And other boards have considered restrictions, but as I say, I would much prefer that we moved on this together once the report is available in December and the recommendations are made from this expert group.
Jackie Bailey.
The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that in almost half of Scotland's health boards, IVF waiting times are indeed increasing. In NHS Fife, couples are waiting 3 years before treatment, the longest waiting period in the country. Whilst the Cabinet Secretary's announcement of additional funding is of course welcome, if long overdue, can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that that funding will also tackle the postcode lottery in treatment cycles and the cut-off age for treatment, as well as reducing waiting times?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I expect a report I get at the end of December to deal with all of these issues, and I hope glad the member welcomes the additional £12 million Mr Matheson announced over the weekend to be invested in reducing waiting times across Scotland. When we're looking at waiting times, we also have to look at the increased throughput figures and take account of that before we are critical of the waiting times, although I do accept, for example, in the case of Fife, with a 3-year waiting time, that is far too long.